Was this my worst reading month yet this year? I think so. My name is Carly and welcome to my channel. I read and review historical fiction primarily, and I am here to share my August reading wrap up. Last month I read 8 books, had 1 DNF, which I count in the 8, and I only had 1 5-star read. I typically read anywhere from 10 to 12, sometimes more books per month, but for some reason I just could not focus on a book in August. And I think that may have a lot to do with the fact that I was really busy creating a lot of content. But I want to get back into the flow in September. I'm already off to a really great start. It is September 6th, and I have finished 2 books so far this month and am on target to probably finish another 2 this weekend. So some of those were leftovers that I had started at the end of August and kind of rolled over into September reading. I have my handy dandy post-it note here, and I'm going to try and just remember what I can from these books off the top of my head. This is not scripted. Sometimes I do make a script before I come on, but today I didn't. I've already shared a version of this video over on TikTok, but I didn't go into a lot of detail as to what my experience was with the book. I just kind of said, if you like this, then you may enjoy this book. Here today, I am going to dig in to the good, the bad, and ugly of some of these books. Up first is one of my most anticipated reads of the year. The Possession of Alba Diaz by Isabel Cañas is definitely one for people who like creepy, spooky stories. I read and loved Vampires of El Norte when it first came out. That is her previous book. And I was really hoping that this would be just as good. Sadly, it wasn't as good. I did find that it was a little slow at times. I tried to read this one with my eyes primarily for the first, I would say, third of the book. And I was just really struggling to pick it back up. So I thought maybe let's shift to the audio and see if that makes a difference. And fortunately it did. I will still say that there was a lot of focus on setting the stage. And I'll tell you a little bit about the premise of the book in a second, but I definitely think this is for people who love a setting as a main character. There is an element to this book that is very much about the life and times and place where this book is set. And I think that it does a really great job of capturing kind of Mexican culture and folklore. And I love, love, love that about her work. Her and Silvia Moreno Garcia are really great at creating kind of weird, creepy stories that incorporate their own heritage. And I love that. Love, love, love it. I enjoyed the horror elements of this book because, yes, it is a historical horror. I think that was probably the best part of this book. The female main character was really great, and I enjoyed the romance. It wasn't too heavy-handed. The romance is definitely not a focus of this book as compared to, let's say, Vampires of El Norte, which really truly was a love story. So this book is all about Alba learns as a young adult that she was adopted. She was actually found abandoned as an infant in a mine. Her father was working at the mine, brought her home, and raised her. She and her parents are affluent. As a result, her marriage is going to be really important. And Alba has some really strong opinions about marriage. She does not want to marry someone and become essentially their pet. She doesn't want other people calling the shots for her, so she's a really independent young woman. She describes her ideal marriage situation in the book as basically one where she can sit and knit all day. And I kind of love that about her. She has attached herself to her oldest friend. They're going to get married, and it's not really a love match. They're more friends. And she knows that he will never kind of demand of her the same things that another man might. And she would have a certain degree of freedom if she marries him. Plus, it kind of helps his family in a sense. There is a little bit of manipulation involved in this story, but overall, I think that it doesn't take away from our main character's character. The plague has hit their city, and as a result, they go to a mining town where a mine owned by her fiance's family is located. It just so happens to be the same mine where Alba was found as an infant. And immediately upon arriving, she, starts to feel weird, act weird, starts sleepwalking for the first time in a long time. And the story just kind of evolves from there. While there, she meets another young man who is kind of an outsider. He's from the wrong side of the tracks. Love those kind of stories. And they connect in a way that ultimately is romantic, but their connection initially begins as one of survival and happenstance. And we're in this really weird situation. And did you see that, or did you hear that? Or it's one of those kind of situations where over time, because of the situation that they're in, they become closer and closer. Overall, a great book. Definitely a good one for the spooky season. I would highly recommend this if you love stories about possession or demons. And there is a lot of kind of politics, specifically religious politics in this book. Just like her previous book, there's a lot of kind of social commentary around colonization. And I love that. Overall, a good book. I highly recommend if you love historical horror and you've read and loved Isabel Cañas's books before. It's not as good as vampires, but still worth a read. Another book that I read and enjoyed a lot was The View from Lake Como by Adriana Trigiani. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. I have read one of her other books and really enjoyed it. But this one was a little different. She typically, from what I understand, writes primarily historical fiction novels. This is a contemporary fiction with a lot of heart. And I definitely recommend this to anyone who likes family stories, particularly, family stories that focus on kind of just the weird quirks of family. She does a great job of creating and crafting characters and families that are very indelible. There were some issues that I had with this book, which we'll talk about, but overall, I did enjoy this. I think the ending made a big difference in this book. Not to spoil anything, but this is one I want you to know there's an HEA. There's a happily ever after in this book. This is all about a young woman who is living in the basement of her parents' home after a divorce, which we really never understand truly why she's divorced, other than she just wasn't happy. There is one kind of pivotal moment, I think, in her marriage that we hear about in the book, but pretty late in the book, and also very, just kind of, it felt like fleeting. And that's one of the complaints that I've seen other people share about this book. And I will agree with that the divorce never really kind of makes sense unless you've been in an unhappy relationship before, then it kind of does. But the main character's husband or ex-husband is really lovable and kind, and she loves him a lot. And that comes across, and it just didn't work. I can see why some might think that she just kind of gave up on her marriage a little easily or early. But anyway, she is kind of in this situation where she doesn't have a lot going for her. Really, the only good thing in her life is her job, which she really enjoys. She works for her uncle, with whom she's very, very close. He's kind of her best friend. And she helps him in the family business, which is a marble business. And he suddenly dies and leaves her the business. And little did she know that there's some bad business associated with this. This is very much about an Italian-American family in New Jersey. There are some stereotypes, I would say, about Italian-Americans that show up in this book. But she is also an Italian-American and wrote this book. The FBI get involved. And as a result of their involvement, everything's kind of the brakes are put on everything. She can't really go back to work, can't really operate the business. While the business is under investigation, she decides she's going to go to Carrara, Italy, where her uncle spent a summer, where they have other family ties, and she's going to almost like apprentice or something there. While there, she, of course, meets someone, continues on this self-discovery journey that she had just begun when the book first started, signing up for therapy online, really trying to understand more about herself and where she is and why she is where she is in her life. Overall, this book is very much a self-discovery experience. There is a romance involved, but it's not too heavy-handed on the romance, more used as a device to further explore our character and kind of where she is in her life. I did enjoy so much about this book. The family, the characters that she creates are just terrific. I said in a previous review that I feel like not only did she create these characters from people that she knows them well. I said specifically the mother in this book, I feel like our author knows that woman. She was terrific. There is, as I said, a lot of what we believe to be true about Italian American families. So there's a lot of kind of culture in this book. I would also say that this book made me laugh. I chuckled so much while reading this book. I did primarily listen to this, though I did read several chapters with my eyes just to get that experience. The audio is narrated by Mira Sorvino, so you know it's great. The accents are on point. I did find this a little heavy-handed on kind of the flowery descriptions. Everything is described, in this very, I don't know what the right word is. I'm not an English major. She over describes everything. What things taste like or smell like or see or, all these things. At times that works really well because, you want to see Italy. You're there with this character, right? You want to taste some of the flavors that she's experiencing on this trip. But it does feel a little heavy-handed at times. If that's something that bothers you, I actually would suggest you read this with your eyes because I noticed that less. Overall, I thought this was good. It was not the most stellar read. I did not enjoy it as much as I enjoyed her last novel, but it felt very much of the time. It was a joyous novel. It was full of heart and it made me cry, which it's the only book. Actually, no, I lie. The other one, I had one other that choked me up, but it's one of two books that I read in August that actually brought a tear to my eye. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that I'm far away from my family, but still feel very drawn to and connected to them. I talk to my dad on the phone for 30 minutes to an hour every single day. I text with my cousins, with my sister. So I have that kind of connection and it made me miss home. It made me miss my family. So I think that it does a great job of, evoking those really complex emotions that we all have related to family. So know that if you love those kinds of novels, then this one might be for you. One of my TBR jar pulls was Atomic Love by Jenny Field. I had a little bit of a mixed response with regard to this book when I announced that this is one of my 4 TBR jar pulls for the month of August. Some people reached out and said they really enjoyed this book. Others reached out and said, nah, it was only mid, or I didn't really enjoy it at all. So I kind of went in a little less optimistic than I normally would be about a book. And I was pleasantly surprised. This is a romance. I don't know what else to say other than if you do not like books with heavy-handed romance, this probably isn't for you. It does have a lot of suspense and there is a whole other, plot line to this story, which I'll talk about in a second, but it felt very heavy-handed on the romance. I'll just say that. It is a Women in STEM book, which is actually our theme for September in the BBFL, the Book Besties for Life book club, my book club on Fable. But I had already read this one and this actually got me thinking about women in STEM, and that's what prompted me to choose that as the theme for September reading. I loved that about this book and I wanted more of it. Unfortunately, the character isn't really working in science during this book. So when we meet her, our FMC has been essentially kind of fired from the Manhattan Project. She was let go after this report came out about her, that an anonymous report, by the way, that saying that she couldn't really handle herself. She had a lot of things going on in her life that were distracting her, and she was emotionally unstable and all this, all this stuff. This is, mind you, after the atomic bombs had been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And she had also just been abruptly broken up with by the love of her life. So granted, she may have been a little distracted, but ultimately it resulted in her losing her job and not being able to find anything else in the field. She is a scientist and ends up working at a department store in Chicago selling jewelry, which is a little odd. It's an odd choice. So I was disappointed in the fact that we didn't have her active in science. So this book, it wasn't quite like The Woman with the Cure, which I really loved. I felt like that one was deep into science. You really were on a journey with that character and behind the scenes with her doing the work. Not the same with Atomic Love, not the same. When we first meet her, it's been years since she spoke to her ex, who she regards as just like really this terrible, awful guy. She's mad, she's angry, and he's the pits. And she's approached by a CIA agent who says, you know what, we think that your ex is somehow involved in trading secrets with the Russians. So we have a Cold War story happening here. And we want you to reconnect with him and get information. And at first she's like, yeah, no, I'm not even going there. Like, I hate this dude. Ultimately, she does get talked into it. So she reconnects with her ex and has really conflicted and complicated emotions once she is reconnected with him. And meanwhile, she starts to develop feelings for the CIA agent that recruited her to do this work. And it's really all about that love triangle, as well as trying to find out whether or not her ex really is involved. And there are some really tense moments, like she's being followed by this Russian agent. Some really terrible things happen that are dangerous and heighten the intensity of this book. And I did love that. I love a good Cold War story. So I felt like this was really great. One of the things that I really did enjoy the most is our main male character, the CIA agent. He is a World War II veteran and he is disabled because of the war. So there's some disability representation in this book and I enjoyed that. He is really this kind of broken guy. And I really enjoyed the way that the author wrote that character and portrayed him. So yeah, if you like a romance with a historical setting tied to a, kind of propulsive plot line, then you may enjoy this. It was not steamy. So I think it was mostly fade to black. There were not a lot of really explicit situations. So I appreciated that. I'm not a big open door romance reader, but yeah, I enjoyed it. I loved this book. Yes, I did a sponsored post for this book, my first ever, and I was so excited about that. Woo! Do not think that just because I screamed and hollered about how much I loved it on this sponsored post that I really didn't. I thought this was a great book. And if you have read and loved Madeline Martin in the past, then you're going to really love this book. It is full of her kind of signature charm and joyfulness. I love how hopeful her books feel. I will say that this one has some, kind of heavier themes than previous Madeline Martins that I've read. There is a domestic violence situation in this book, for example. There's mental health, discussion about mental health in this book. But overall, it still felt very hopeful, and I love that. The Secret Book Society is set in Victorian London. We have an affluent widow who's a member of the aristocracy who decides to use her money and her kind of social influence to create this Secret Book Society and invite women who are kind of in difficult situations in their life. These are all fellow women of the aristocracy, which I found kind of interesting. Characters, at least, that we read about in stories about Victorian London are usually pretty downtrodden. They are of the lower socioeconomic classes. And I thought it was an interesting take on that time period, that we got to see into the lives of women of the aristocracy and how even in these economically influential situations, they still faced some real challenges. Under the guise of afternoon tea, they all go to Lady Duxbury's home, where she unveils her library and invites them to read any book that they like. All of these women, for various reasons, have been restricted in their reading. One young woman's father has refused to give her access to books and to allow her to read, thinking that it will trigger kind of emotional instability in her because she has already shown a predisposition to that. One woman married a man who was kind of up and coming in her social class. He married her to elevate his social standing, and come to find out he's a real jerk and he doesn't allow her to read or even to choose what to wear. Another young woman is an American heiress, and she is married into the English aristocracy with the express purpose of bolstering the family's fortune. Think Downton Abbey. And her husband has recently refused to allow her to read books because he just learned that he is going to be elevated in his station, and he feels he has to train her to meet certain societal expectations of her soon-to-be station. Over the course of the book, we follow each of the women as their kind of situation changes and struggles ensue. Meanwhile, we're also learning about Lady Duxbury's past, and we're watching them develop these really influential and lasting friendship. In the end, friendship really kind of saves the day. And I love that about this book, that there is that hopeful message that through the power of reading, through the power of friendship, through the power of fellowship around books, these women really kind of found themselves again and found a voice when they otherwise did not have one. So I enjoyed this. I gave it 4.5 stars. I thought it was well deserving of that. It was one of those books that felt warm and cozy, which I've had that same experience with Madeline Martin's work in the past. And yeah, I loved it. Another TBR jar pull for the month of August. I have had this book for literally years, and everyone says that I was going to love it. But I'd also heard some mixed reviews of Hester, specifically from people who love witchy books, like books with witchcraft, like spells, potions, that kind of stuff. And I am one of those people. I love books with witches and witchcraft. This kind of gets lumped into the witchy book genre. And I was afraid that I would be disappointed by the lack of witchcraft in this book, because I had been told that though it's lumped into the witchy category, it's not a book about witchcraft. And I will say that is 100% true. And I did find that a little disappointing, but not as much as I thought I would. I enjoyed this book a lot. I, in fact, am going to keep this copy, and that I think is a mark of how much I love a book. So, for example, I'm not keeping a copy of A View from Lake Como, and I'm not keeping a copy of Atomic Love. Those are going to go to my local little free library and let someone else discover those books. I definitely would reread this. And that's usually why I keep a book, either to reread it or to continue to share about it in the future. And this falls into that category. I really enjoyed our female main character and the element of female rage that was in this book. I loved that. It wasn't heavy-handed, but I felt vengeful because of what happens and transpires in this book. So this book is all about a young woman who has synesthesia, and that means that she can see and hear colors. And, obviously back in early 19th century, nobody really understood that or knew or believed that it was a thing. So people who have visions like this were believed to be witches. So throughout the whole book, there's this kind of underlying tension around her synesthesia. She feels she cannot share her truth about her synesthesia with anyone, and has been expressly told by her mother not to, because her mother and her mother's mother experienced the same thing and ultimately were believed to be witches. She does have in her own family this history of a woman being accused of witchcraft, and she escapes. And that story is kind of flowing throughout this one. and she calls on that particular ancestral situation for strength. But she ain't no witch. And anybody who says this is a witchy book, I don't know. I don't know that I believe that this is a witchy book. It's a fall book, that's for sure. But there ain't no witchcraft. She is very skilled with her needle, meaning she embroiders beautifully. And there's there is this implication in the book that she is more skilled than others with her needle because of her synesthesia, which, okay, maybe that's the case, but that's not magic. I don't know. But then it does have this kind of touch of other. So in my review on TikTok, I did say if you like a touch of magic, because it is touched. Just bing, ding, touched by magic. Overall, this is a story of a young woman, as I said, with synesthesia, who marries a man who, come to find out, isn't such a great guy. He gets into kind of financial straits in Edinburgh, where they're from, and they have to immigrate to America and end up in Salem. And there she meets Nathaniel Hawthorne and falls madly in love with him. So it's very much the story of their romance, as well as her acclimation to Salem. There are also various characters in Salem from different walks of life. So there's that kind of focus on early American life, which I appreciated, including kind of different social hierarchies within the town of Salem. And there is also a little bit of a threat. It's been only 30 or 40 years since the Salem witch trials. So there's still kind of that vibe of, I can't tell anyone my secret because I may be accused of witchcraft. Hopefully the town has moved past that, but yeah, you never know. There is still a very puritanical element to life in Salem at this point. Ultimately, her heart is broken by many men. Then she finds herself in a situation where she has to really call on, again, that kind of ancestral heritage that she has and her own inner strength to make a way for herself. I loved that about this character. I love a good bootstraps story, especially one full of female rage. I see why everyone loves this book. It was very well written. I would definitely read more by this author, and I am going to be keeping this and calling upon it in the future, but it's not a witchy book. I don't know. Maybe it is. I don't know. I'm very torn about it. Does that make sense? I'd love to hear your thoughts about this one. Before we talk about my favorite book of the month, I've left that one for last. I'm going to talk about the two books that I was most disappointed in this month. Start with this one. To the Wild Horizon by Emma Jean Martin was the August BBFL book club pick. Every month I create a poll, and lately it's had a theme behind it. The theme for August was Let's Head West. So all four of the books that I put in there were Western historical fiction, and the book club chose this book. And the first half of this book was so freaking good, y'all. So good. But the last half or third, I lost interest, mainly because it became less about an adventure and more about this romance that had been developing and I'd been enjoying throughout the first half of the book. But I think the reason why it became really frustrating and really overshadowed everything else about the book at that point is it's all about this miscommunication that's happening between these two characters. And I'll explain in a second. I felt like that took away from the story, and it did not, I don't know. I don't hate miscommunication trope. I actually have a favorite book that is all about miscommunication. The entire book is about miscommunication. It's one of the best books I've ever read, and it's called Talking at Night. But this one, the author also chose to use the amnesia trope toward the end of the book, and I was like, okay, now I'm really ready for this book to be over. But I did like it. it ended with this sweet note and left it open for future stories. And I did enjoy the book overall. As I said, the first half was so well written. I felt like I was right in the wagon on the wagon trail with our female main character. I mean, the author did a great job of conjuring up that experience. So this book is all about a young woman who, at the beginning of the book, we find her in this very compromised situation. This man who she's renting a room from, her and her younger brother, has essentially broken into her home and is demanding sex from her. And she shoots him in the leg. Well, he happens to fall and hit his head and is knocked unconscious. And she thinks that she's killed him. And her brother are on their own. Their family have died. Their parents died from cholera. Yep. And that's why they're on their own. And they're kind of on their way out to Oregon to find their older brother. Well, overnight, they have to create a plan to get out of town. And it just so happens there's a wagon train leaving the next morning. So she and her younger brother kind of connive their way onto this wagon train. And I say connive because it's being essentially run by the U.S. military. And this captain overseeing this military outfit has a chip on his shoulder about women. And he basically said, not only do I think women, do not belong on the wagon trail, I especially think that women on their own do not belong on the wagon trail. Well, she's a woman on her own. She poses as a married woman, leads the captain to believe that, her husband's just, at the shop getting something or whatever. So she came to sign up for the wagon train. And her younger brother is supposed to be her son. Well, again, the first, quarter of the book or so, it's all about kind of, making sure that the captain doesn't find out who she really is or that they're on their own. Well, then he eventually finds out and he tells her, you have until we get to this specific spot on the trail and to prove yourself, to prove that you can do this. So the next quarter of the book or so is all about her will to do this and overcoming all these various obstacles and situations and really kind of showing herself as somewhat of a leader among the women specifically on the wagon trail, but also just an indispensable part of the trail or part of the train. Well, then they start kind of falling for each other. And at first it's really charming. I loved that they kind of were enemies at first, and then they developed this mutual respect because of certain situations that happen. And born out of that respect, we start to see romantic feelings. So it starts off as very sweet, very charming. And then, then they're just full on in love and he still thinks that she's married. So he feels very torn and conflicted and, morally just crappy about the situation. She's still scared that if he finds out the truth, not only will he, not love her anymore, but he might also decide that she can't finish the train with them. And it just kind of devolves from there. So in the end, it was a sweet romance. I did enjoy the adventure element of this story. I just wish that the miscommunication would not have been so heavy-handed. Everyone who read this book in the club felt the same way. It was rated between 3 and 4 stars, nothing greater than a 4-star rating that I can remember. I ended up at around 3.5 because I did enjoy the book. I would read something else by this author. I just wish she would have done something different with the communication between the FMC and the MMC in this book. I love a good thriller every once in a while. My favorite thriller, if you had to ask me, if you told me name one right now, it would be Strange Sally Diamond. I love that book and highly recommend it. So I do like to read thrillers. I like to read one typically once a month or once every other month. And I got this in the mail from St. Martin's Press and I was intrigued. I don't always like stories about rich people doing bad things. So I kind of got that vibe from the synopsis of this book. And then I opened it up and I started reading and I started listening because I was kind of trying to do a tandem read. And it's about a young woman who's just graduated high school who her younger sister is sick and her aunt broke her back or something, and her mom was supposed to go stay with her aunt but can't now because her younger sister's sick, so she's going to go stay with her aunt for the summer in their big palatial home in Greenwich. And upon arriving, she starts to notice weird things about her aunt. She's just not acting herself. And there is she was kind of going to be a babysitter, but there's also a nanny. And now there's this weird kind of almost, sexual tension between the two of them. And I don't know. I didn't get very far in this book before I DNF'd it. I wasn't vibing with the main character. She felt very young. Obviously, she's just graduated high school. There are some kind of like flashback elements. So she's telling her story in a future state. But even so, she just felt very immature and whiny and just really grating. And I really cannot stand when an author uses this kind of like reflective device. That's not really a word. I don't know. Again, I'm not an English major. This particular author constantly had her main character who, again, she's looking back and telling this story and she's constantly asking, what if I would have known, or what if, I would have noticed, or what if that night wouldn't have happened, or what if I would have realized, or what if, it got on my nerves. So I had to put it down. I did DNF this. I'm very sorry to St. Martin's Press and to this author. It just wasn't for me. That doesn't mean it's not going to be for everybody else. I think it gets okay marks on Goodreads, but yeah, it just wasn't for me. Now for my favorite book of the month. I will not lie. I had the highest hopes ever about this book because this author wrote one of my all-time favorite books. I'm talking about Alex Harrow and her new book, The Everlasting. My favorite that I was mentioning is The Once and Future Witches, which please, for the love of all that's holy, read this book. I should probably come on and do a book review specific to that book because it's not for everybody, but I would love everybody to try it. Anyway, The Everlasting. Y'all. Oh, I love this book so much. I love this romance so much. I love this character so much. Even just thinking about it, I'm a little breathless. I'm not gonna lie. It's that good. It's kind of making me weepy. I did cry at the end, but only tears of joy. I freaking this woman can write a book. Not only are these characters terrific, it's just the way she uses words and language. Her prose is unbelievably good. Unbelievably good. So this is a fantasy. I am not a fantasy reader. I don't typically read fantasy novels. I specifically do not read romantasy books. I'm not into that whatsoever. The ones that I have read because I was influenced by Bookstagram or Book Talk to read, but this. So it is a fantasy set in a completely, made up country called Dominion. And we have a current state, and then we have a time loop that flashes back to what sounds like medieval time. We've got suits of armor and knights and jousts and, swords and this sort of thing. So we have this kind of medieval element to the story. We've got time loops in this story. It's just so rich. I loved everything about this book, you guys. So we have our main male character who is a researcher, specifically a historian. And he, from a very young age, has always loved this folklore about a female knight from the early ages of Dominion who essentially kind of helped put a queen on the throne, who united the various tribes to form Dominion. So this female knight is essentially looks to for strength. He is heavily influenced by the story of this female knight. And everyone around him is, but he is especially, it's kind of the rallying call of the country. Remember Una the Everlasting. He studies this story of this person who is believed to have lived. He's read all the books, all the various iterations of this story. He feels like he knows this story by heart, this story of Una Everlasting. Well, one day, a book shows up on his doorstep that is essentially the true story of Una Everlasting. And he finds himself really transfixed by this book. Who wrote this? Where did it come from? How has it never been discovered in the history of our country, and yet it's on my doorstep? So there's a mystery around this book. He's invited to go to the local kind of government building where he meets the leader of their country. I forget exactly what the terminology used. At the time, I think she is an undersecretary, but eventually becomes president. He goes to this building to meet this woman who, calls on him to help save the country. That, there's all these factions right now politically, and there's a lot of infighting, and we need something to rally behind. We need something to motivate everybody and bring everybody together under the flag of dominion. And he realizes that that's what this book is, and he's supposed to translate this book as it's written in this ancient language. And next thing you know, he finds himself transported back to Una's time period, meets Una under the yew tree, and their story begins. Over the course of the book, we hear from his perspective as well as from Una's perspective. So we have dual point of views, and it's like they're talking to each other and remembering and reminding each other, remember when I found you there. We ultimately learn that this woman who sent him back in time with this challenge to kind of rally dominion and to write the story of Una Everlasting has been manipulating time and manipulating Una, manipulating him. Well, ultimately, they fall for each other. We go on this epic journey to help free them from this time loop so that they can live together in peace. And you guys, when I tell you, I fell hard for this book. I have not ordered a pre-order copy. I won't lie, I'm still kind of secretly hoping I'll get one in the mail from the publisher. Maybe I should write to them. I probably should write my review first and post that. But yeah, this book is everything. It is definitely going to be on my top 10 of the year. And I would reread this in a heartbeat. Is this for everybody? Absolutely not. There are dragons. Not a lot, but there are dragons. And if you don't vibe with fantasy books like this, then I would say don't even bother picking this one up. If you do not like open door romances, this for sure is not for you, because this was steamy. For me, it was steamy. My pepper meter is probably a little sensitive because I don't read open door books. But again, I'll read anything that Alex Harrow writes. It did feel a little raunchy. Only at times, but not in a trashy way. I don't know how to, but it definitely was steamy. So if that's not your thing, then you might want to avoid this too. But if you're like me, you can kind of tolerate it from time to time. If it's done well, then you can, then feel free to check this one out. I struggle to find the right words to articulate how I feel about this book. I loved how political this book was. I loved that Alex Harrow took an opportunity to talk about propaganda in this book and to talk about misinformation and the way that governments essentially twist the narrative. I loved that. I thought that was brilliant. More than anything though, I love the way that she writes. If you want a soulmate, star-crossed lovers romance that you're not going to forget, you need to read this book. That was my August. I've talked a lot today. This is a longer video than I've made in a while. Let me know, what was your favorite read of August? Have you read any of these and what did you think? Are you excited to read any of them? Had you heard about some of them before? Hopefully so. Until next time, happy reading.